In this episode, we're going to talk about what exactly happens in the storyline of POE 3.26, secrets of the Atlas update and its Atlas rework. Before we start our discussion, I strongly recommend that everyone watch the previous episode's gameplay compilation first. You can skip around, but at least you need to have some impression of these story scenes in your head. So when we discuss them later, you won't be completely lost about what we're talking about. Alright, let's jump right in. In 3.26, the story that Eagon takes us through can be roughly divided into 3 segments: the first, second, and third memory threads. In each segment, we experience similar things. For example, in the second to last map, we'll encounter an aberration that tells us some things. Then we fight a small boss. That small boss also has an aberration that tells us more things. Then we fight new pinnacle bosses, and they also have aberrations next to them that tell us even more. Through these 3 repeating memory thread segments, the complete storyline is formed. The sections are numbered, such as Zana 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. These aren't numbers from the actual text. I made up these numbers myself. I think grouping these aberrations makes it easier for us to understand what's actually happening. Looking at the colors, first Zana 1.1 to 1.3 talks about what Zana is actually doing, what she's doing inside the Atlas. The orange ones, 2.1 to 2.3, are Zana's views on the small bosses, these 3 small bosses. And Valdo 1 to 2 to 3, he's just talking about Valdo's perspective on Zana's memories, these 3 moments of solitude, trauma, and awe. Grouping these things makes it easier to understand. And of course there's the white ones. Those are just some of Eagon's dialogue and some cutscenes, basically his interactions with Zana. We'll go through these one by one, but we'll look at them in reverse order. I'll start from Eagon and Zana's interactions and work backwards to see what Zana is actually doing. First, the story interactions between Eagon and Zana. When we first meet Eagon Sirus, he says he's conducting extremely important research and a mission. Next to him, we see there's a tear. That's the English word, like something that's been ripped open. He thinks this is some originator who left traces in these Atlas maps, and we need to track her down. The purpose of tracking this originator is that Eagon wants to save the originator. He straight up tells you, "I think the originator is trapped. I want to save her." This is our first encounter with him. Then Eagon uses his custom gloves to open the first memory thread, and we start mapping. In the final map, we come to the Courtyard of Wasting, where we fight the first small boss, the Neglected Flame. This small boss has Sirus's appearance. Pay special attention to this. Eagon also tells you directly that he actually thinks this originator is Zana. Zana is his sister. He's here to save his sister. He tells you straight up, he's not hiding it. After we beat this small boss, we enter Zana's memory moment, the solitude moment, and fight the incarnation of neglect. Then we go into a story segment where Eagon says, "Zana, you might not know me, but I am indeed your brother." He doesn't finish saying this, and Zana tells him, "No, I actually do know you. Listen to me. You need to stop pursuing me. You must leave." Then Eagon is totally stunned. "You actually know me?" So after the first meeting ends, Eagon is very confused, like, "How does she know me? Aren't I a bastard son? Why would she know me?" This gets into Eagon's self-perception. He believes he's Valdo's illegitimate son and Zana's brother. It's written in his dialogue that it took him years to understand that he had Caesaria's blood flowing through him, because his appearance, eye color, hair, all these talents were exactly the same. He thinks he's a bastard son. So Zana shouldn't know me, right? But why does Zana say she knows me? Then we come to the second memory thread. Same thing. In the final map, Chambers of Impurity, we fight the second small boss, which has a Cardinal appearance. Eagon says, "Sister, I'm here to save you." Then we enter his trauma moment, fight the incarnation of fear, and open dialogue. Eagon says, "Zana, wait, I need to talk to you properly. I want to understand." Zana says there's nothing to say, you won't understand, you shouldn't understand. There's no other way to stop them, and no other way to stop him. What are them here? In our thinking, when the Atlas mentions them, It's probably referring to those cosmic entities from different stars, like the Maven, the Searing Exarch, and the Eater of Worlds. Them should refer to some cosmic entities, and there's no other way to stop him. Linguistically, we'd lean toward this him referring to Valdo, her father, because all of Zana's story basically comes from her process of pursuing her father in the Atlas. So this him probably refers to Valdo. After the second meeting ends, Eagon is still very confused. He can't really understand what Zana is talking about. So the third memory thread opens. In the final map, we come to the Theatre of Lies, fight the Deceitful God, which has Innocence's appearance. Then we come to Zana's awe moment, fight the Incarnation of Fear. Then we enter the memory tear and open the final dialogue with Zana. Zana says there are some truths we shouldn't know, some realities that shouldn't exist. Eagon still doesn't understand, like, what are you even talking about? Can you just tell me the truth directly? Then she tells him, we must destroy it. Destroy what? The Atlas. We must destroy the Atlas. Why destroy the Atlas? Eagon doesn't really get it. Then Zana tells him, this imbalance has reached its peak, and I as the catalyst must stay, so that afterwards no one can harness its power. This it should refer to, she wants to destroy the Atlas, so that afterwards no one can use the Atlas's power. Then Eagon says, sister, can you let me help you? Zana says, enough, I am not your sister. Haha, I'm not your sister. You don't have a sister. Of course, Eagon is totally stunned. Zana tells him, you mean much to me, more than you could ever know, and that is why I must destroy it. Same thing, this it refers to the Atlas. After the final dialogue, Eagon feels even more confused. If she's not my sister, then who am I? All these years I believed she was my sister, but if she's not my sister, that means Valdo isn't my father. I must understand the truth. How to understand the truth? Just keep mapping, and wait for GGG to write the next Atlas update. Let me summarize here. When we first encounter Eagon, he says, find the originator. Here we go. Then in the first memory thread, he says, sister, you might not know me, but I'm here to save you. Zana says, I know you. Eagon, what? In the second memory thread, he says, we need to talk properly. Zana says, no need, you don't need to know, there's no other way. Eagon is stunned again. Third memory thread, Eagon is still confused, saying, what are you even talking about? Zana tells him, the Atlas must be destroyed and I'm not your sister. Eagon is stunned yet again. Afterwards, Eagon starts wondering, if I'm not Zana's brother, then who am I? Why destroy the Atlas? That's the story interaction between Eagon and Zana. Next, let's look at the aberrations, Valdo 1 to Valdo 3, which represent Valdo's views on Zana's memories. First is the moment of loneliness. The moment of loneliness story is that Valdo is seriously fixing this golden map device, so he ignores Zana, and Zana feels lonely, hence the moment of loneliness. Valdo says, my journey was not without meaning. This journey refers to exploration in the Atlas. I now see these problems, whatever I have become. He became the Shaper. Then he started becoming obsessed with creating a perfect world. He understands his mistakes, but she still won't face me. This she probably refers to our Zana. Next segment, Trauma Moment. The trauma moment story is Valdo studying some books and ancient texts, and again ignoring Zana. He says here, our existence represents humanity's complete ignorance of their own helplessness. As Valdo explores the Atlas, he gradually discovers that humanity actually faces certain crises. Like we discussed in a previous video, Rayclass seems caught in a loop. We discussed how Rayclass seems to be facing an existential crisis, and this existential crisis might be brought on by demonic invasion. Dominus and Venarius actually knew about this, and of course Valdo knew too. When they understand this, they realize that humanity is truly ignorant of their own helplessness. So they study ancient texts to resist this potential future existential crisis. Of course, Zana doesn't understand. She just sees her father ignoring her. During the research process, Valdo's emotions gradually deteriorated, so he feels anger, some darkness in his heart keeps growing, which creates the so-called incarnation of fear. The Dreamlands mentioned here refers to the Atlas. If the real world is flawed, perhaps I could build a better place. You can see here that Valdo gradually becomes extremist. From controlling the worlds to extremist wanting to build a perfect place, he's already gone off track. Then we come to the third segment, the moment of reverence. The moment of reverence story is Valdo standing on a podium making a declaration. He basically says, this dreamland, the Atlas, is a promised land that can bring us a brighter future. We should explore it deeply. It says, the High Templar grows increasingly cruel with me. This High Templar should refer to the Templar leadership, which at the time was Venarius. He thinks I, Valdo, am colluding with secret heretics, but he's wrong. I've never known such fury. The truth about Innocence means nothing to him. How the Templars fight has nothing to do with him. That was his wife's cause. That was my wife's cause, not mine. What was his wife's cause? Considering this Aberration's title is Twilight, so the secret heretics here basically don't refer to the Immortal Syndicate. It has nothing to do with Katarina. Considering the title is Twilight, his wife was very likely a member of the so-called Twilight Order. This Twilight Order is actually from POE, so there might be a connection made here. Let me summarize what Aberration's Valdo 133 tell us. First, it roughly describes Valdo's past experience. He fixed the map device, entered other realms, discovered humanity's smallness and those potential threats, very likely demonic invasion. So he mastered the Shaper's power, trying to create a better place for Zana. Obviously, during the process, he was influenced by the Atlas and became more extremist. Next, let's look at Aberration Zana 2.1 to 2.3. These are Zana's views on the small bosses. First, the first small boss is the Neglected Flame, and this Neglected Flame has Sirus's appearance. This is very important. The first one we encounter is Sirus. Let's remember this fact. Who is Sirus? Sirus was the captain of the Elder Slayers. During his exploration of the Atlas with Zana, they gradually developed feelings for each other. In the end, they were heading to the final battle to exile the Elder. His relationship with Zana was kind of like that, if I come back alive, I'll marry Zana flag. Since he raised that flag, naturally he was exiled together with the Elder during the battle. But Sirus's disappearance didn't mean the end of things. The other members of the Elder Slayer squad kept entering and leaving the Atlas, and during this process they became increasingly insane. This happened during the War for the Atlas update. In that storyline, because these Elder Slayer squad members went crazy, Zana tried to seal the map device to trap them in the Atlas so they couldn't get out, but they still found a way to break out of the Atlas and return to the present. Even Sirus, who seemed to have been exiled with the Elder at the time, returned to the Atlas, and in the final battle with Sirus, Oriath was destroyed. I'm sure players who've been playing continuously are familiar with this whole storyline. So in this Aberration, it says the Atlas took control of Sirus, not only changing his body but also twisting him into something unrecognizable. Zana hopes that what Sirus experienced will never happen again. Absolutely must never happen again. The second small boss is Rage of the Templars, and this boss has the appearance of a Cardinal. The Aberration mentions that normally Templars should be that kind of radiant, righteous image for the religious order, right? But instead, they commit dirty deeds in the name of virtue. What specifically? They would strike down people who disagreed with them, label them as heretics, then burn, kill, and plunder them. That's why it says they have blood on their hands. Behind all this is the Atlas's reward, the power granted by the Atlas. These Templars didn't see it as dangerous, but used it as a weapon to do these things. The third small boss is Mind of a God, which has Innocence's appearance. This innocence is the core faith of the Templar order, symbolizing purity, light, and righteousness. Normally, it should be like this. But in the Forbidden Sanctum League, we discovered from that storyline that when Innocence originally established this order, his doctrine was copied from others, his symbols were copied from others, and even his method of gathering faith was through belittling his brother Sin. Only then could he gather faith and ascend to godhood. So Innocence's entire process of becoming a god was actually full of falsehood, lies, and deception. He's not truly such a pure symbol. If we get the chance, we'll make another episode about what exactly happened to Innocence back then. Let's continue. When faith goes unchallenged, this faith here can also be understood as belief or conviction. It's different from the religious belief we mentioned earlier. So when belief goes unchallenged, this kind of power is no less dangerous than any god, and the Atlas is no exception. It will twist people's beliefs and reshape them. This reshaping doesn't make them into saints, but into zealots. We can see this in both Sirus and Zana's father, Valdo. Their beliefs have been twisted. Let me summarize here. So Aberration Zana 2.1 to 2.3 tell us that the Atlas twists beliefs and reshapes those who pursue it, like how Elder Slayers become extremists and discriminatory, using their power to strike down those who disagree with them. Innocence also deviated from what should have been a pure symbol, and the Shaper became obsessed with creating perfect worlds. And what Sirus experienced must never happen again. Zana believes it must never happen again, and what she's doing is extremely crucial. There's a new amulet this league called Whispers of Doom. You can see that in the Atlas. You don't go crazy, you get rewritten. Finally, we get to look at Aberration Zana 1.1 to 1.3, which describe what Zana is actually doing. The first segment, the journey. I once saw the Atlas as a miracle, just like her father, thinking this thing was a promised land. But it actually isn't. There's nothing here that she and her father hope for. Instead, when we shape our will into reality, it comes with certain costs. But we might not know these costs, and when we do know, it's already too late. These things have already eroded us bit by bit. Like we talked about earlier, it's gradually rewriting our thoughts. Zana didn't know how to stop it at the time, but she would definitely find a way later. She had to find a way. Obviously, what she's doing now is what she believes is the method she found. What did Zana do? She set these memory threads in motion across time and space, weaving them into the timeline before he was consumed. Who exactly is being consumed by what? The word used is consume. Looking at the previous passage, it says the Atlas is consuming those who pursue it, also using consume. So the reasonable thinking is that this consumption refers to him being consumed by the Atlas. We weave these memory threads into the timeline before he was consumed, so he can live and no longer be connected to the Atlas, no longer entangled by past or future. This might be the only way to save him, and perhaps the only way to save us all. Who is this him? We'll discuss this later. The next passage says, Zana had already taken sufficient measures, hoping to prevent him, the him from the previous passage, from following in Zana's footsteps. But she didn't expect him to go so deep, overcoming every obstacle Zana had set up. So who is this him? Obviously, this him refers to Eagon. Eagon, step by step, leads us deep into the Atlas in the storyline, pursuing Zana's footsteps, right? So this him is clearly Eagon. We finally finished looking at the 3 memory thread segments. I spoke a bit fast, so if you want to look more carefully, just pause and read the text thoroughly. Next, let's start discussing some questions about the storyline. First question, who exactly is Eagon Sirus? You might say, why discuss who Eagon is? Can't Eagon just be Eagon? Well, based on what we just saw, obviously Eagon is someone who should have been created by Zana through silk threads and some timeline weaving. So Eagon isn't Eagon, and Eagon isn't Zana's brother. Eagon is someone else who existed before. So who exactly is Eagon? We have 2 options here. A. Valdo. B. Sirus. I know some people might say, could there be option C? He's the son of Zana and Sirus. I didn't write this option because I think based on the aberration we just saw, semantically it's not very likely, not likely to be a son. So it's between Valdo and Sirus. Let me just say it directly. Although Eagon looks very similar to Valdo, they both have those determined eyebrows and determined beard, and that determined expression. Although the two of them really look alike, if you ask me, I'm still inclined to think he's Sirus. There are several reasons. First reason, if he's Sirus, there would be a beautiful textual symmetry. What do I mean specifically? In Sirus's journal, he writes, I always wanted a purpose. I wanted to find my place in life. Does this sound familiar? That's right. It's from Eagon's journal that appears during the Atlas progression. This diary is obviously Eagon's diary, and it says, for the first time in my life, I have found meaning, purpose. See, Sirus's journal says, I always wanted a purpose and find my place in life. Eagon's journal says, for the first time I found meaning. I can only say, if Eagon is Sirus, then this whole text is really beautifully written. This kind of being reborn, but still stepping onto the Atlas path, this strong sense of destiny, this is the level of writing we hope to see. I think this is really beautifully written. It has this perfect symmetrical beauty. Second reason is the level of intimacy. What do I mean by level of intimacy? In the final dialogue, Zana tells Eagon, you mean much to me, more than you could ever know. Of course you could say, well, I don't necessarily have to be talking to a boyfriend. I could say to my dad, you mean a lot to me too. That's fine. Let's look at the next one. In the aberration, the outcome, Zana says, a part of me cannot help but feel proud. This sentence has that feeling of worthy of being the man I chose. You wouldn't say about your father, my father going so deep into the Atlas makes me feel proud, right? You wouldn't say that. So from the intimacy level, the possibility that Eagon is Sirus becomes even higher. Third reason is the narrative order. We need to remember that in this entire storyline, the first small boss we encounter, the first image, the neglected flame, is Sirus. This is the beginning of everything. Sirus is the first one we encounter. In this aberration, Zana says what Sirus experienced must never happen again. So my work with the Atlas is very important. The key point is that what Sirus experienced must never happen again. Then in the next aberration, the success, she says, I set the threads in motion across time and space and intervened before the timeline that would have consumed him began to take shape, creating Eagon. So narratively speaking, the most reasonable interpretation is that what she did, the Eagon she made, the person she revived, refers to Sirus. During this weaving process, what he remembers, what he believes, is enough. He forgot his previous memories and has new memories and a new face. So he thinks he's Valdo's bastard son and Zana's brother, but none of this matters. It doesn't matter because as long as he's alive, that's what counts. So from these three reasons, I personally lean toward Eagon Caesarius being Sirus reshaped by Zana using the Atlas's power. I think he is Sirus. Next, what is Zana doing and why does she want to destroy the Atlas? What's she up to? From this point on, I need to give a disclaimer. From now on, I don't have complete confidence in the content that follows. So let's just treat this as discussion and don't take it too seriously. If my ideas are wrong, that's perfectly normal because none of us know how GGG plans to write the subsequent storyline. So what is Zana doing? We only have some scattered clues to piece together. Like in the final dialogue, she says, this imbalance has reached its peak. Now, although this imbalance uses a lowercase I, if you remember back to when we analyzed Henikora's dreams and prophecies, there was one place that constantly emphasized this imbalance. That was in her dream too. At the time, she said this imbalance was very important, and there was a plan in motion. See, back then, it was capitalized imbalance with a capital I. So we said to pay special attention. And now, this imbalance has appeared. Besides the imbalance, the other two dreams also mention a very crucial fulcrum of destiny. This fulcrum of destiny, this starting point is very important, and all balance will come at this moment. This fulcrum of destiny also has a unique item we can see. It's called the fulcrum. And it also mentions that we stand at the convergence of these elements. We must achieve perfect balance. Perfect balance. So this fulcrum of destiny, this point is very important. So what exactly is imbalance? To discuss imbalance, let's look at it in reverse. What is balance? What is the state of balance? Looking at this balanced state, there are roughly two types. First is static balance. The balance achieved by multiple forces acting together, like a scale. A scale achieves balance through two forces, or you might have three forces from different directions acting on the same point, achieving static balance. That's one type. Second is dynamic balance. That is, input equals output, generation equals consumption. This kind of state can also achieve dynamic balance. So what elements does the Atlas possess? Let's think about this. First, the Atlas has power from various entities, right? Second, the Atlas has the ability to turn will into reality, the so-called Shaper's power. Third, the Elder in the Atlas constantly devours memories because its higher power is what's called decay. Looking back at the balanced state from the elements the Atlas possesses. First, the power of various cosmic entities should be a kind of static balance, right? Like we just mentioned, various forces forming a balance. What about the second and third? Well, turning into reality is more like a generative force, an additive behavior. The Elder devouring memories, decay, and void. This kind of power can be seen as consumption, a subtractive behavior. So if it's the second and third combined, they can become a kind of dynamic balance. See, the first point is static balance. The second and third are dynamic balance. Now looking back at the Atlas of Mysteries update, in its storyline, it actually doesn't mention cosmic entities at all. Not at all. Instead, it specifically emphasizes the cost of the Atlas, this cost of turning will into reality. So if we're discussing the balanced state here, isn't it possible, more likely to be the dynamic balance composed of the second and third? This balanced state is more likely. Now discussing this, you might feel like it's a bit of logical forcing. The whole deduction process isn't that smooth. But at least I can only say that currently, I can't think of other possibilities regarding imbalance. This is the most likely route I can think of for this balanced state. So if this balanced state consists of conscious imagination generation and the Elder's devouring consumption forming a dynamic balance, if its balance is this kind of dynamic balance, then what happens when we exile the Elder, when we seal the Elder? Wouldn't that lead to an imbalanced state? If we look back at the text from this perspective, we can see more clearly why Henikora said the consul, that is, Valdo's plan to save his daughter, must fail, and this king of dreams must be allowed to escape. Then you start to understand better. Of course, this king of dreams being allowed to escape doesn't mean calling him back to eat things and create balance, but rather after he's allowed to escape, this whole series of events will happen and will enter the imbalanced state Zana is talking about now. And this kind of imbalanced state has now reached a peak. Zana says she as the catalyst must stay. Note that the original word for catalyst is catalyst. Those of us who've studied chemistry know that a catalyst can only accelerate the progress of reactions or lower activation energy, allowing reactions that weren't so easy to occur to begin reacting. But it can't make things that wouldn't react start reacting. However, here we need to see whether they used a stricter literal usage or a looser metaphorical usage when writing this text. If it's a strict literal usage, then Zana as a catalyst means this thing, this imbalanced state would happen anyway. Zana just accelerates it. If it's a broader metaphorical usage, then it's possible that Zana triggered this thing to happen. But regardless, the imbalanced state that Henikora saw has happened. So what's the purpose of this imbalanced state? What's the point of triggering this imbalanced state? It's mentioned below. This purpose is to destroy the Atlas. They want to destroy the Atlas. Why destroy the Atlas? Because Zana hopes that in the future no one will be able to use the Atlas's power anymore, because the Atlas will twist and deepen a person's intentions. What Sirus experienced absolutely must never happen again. So why can an imbalanced state destroy the Atlas? There are some clues here. What is the Atlas? The Atlas has the ability to constantly reflect and echo will. And this reflective ability is actually like a mirror. In POE2's new breach maps, Calandra has new dialogue. She says, "A shattered mirror can only show shattered reflections." This actually gives us more ideas. If a complete mirror can correctly reflect good virtues, that is, you can see your true self, then wouldn't a broken mirror possibly reflect twisted beliefs? Just like how the Atlas now twists a person's beliefs into evil forms? Wouldn't that mean the Atlas is actually a broken mirror? Taking this thought further, if it's now a broken mirror, then before, didn't it once have a complete mirror? But if we discuss this further, it goes too far. Let's come back. If the Atlas is a broken mirror, then Calandra says, as long as we use enough force, we can shatter this mirror. In other words, this sufficient force. Isn't sufficient force the purpose of imbalance? Imbalance reaches its peak, accumulates power, has sufficient force, and then shatters the mirror. Could it be like this? Let me summarize. What is Zana doing now? She's doing two things. First, saving people. Second, destroying the Atlas. Save who? Save the two most important men in her life. One is her lover, Sirus. One is her father, Valdo. How to save Sirus? Zana uses silk memory to weave timelines and reshape him into Eagon. What about destroying the Atlas? Zana triggers the imbalanced state to reach its peak, accumulates power, and shatters the Atlas in one blow. As for Father Valdo Caesarius, thinking back to this season's storyline, Zana seems to be using childhood memories to anchor her father's human image. Why anchor Valdo's human image? Because in past seasons, we know that Valdo, as Zana's father, actually hoped to create a safe place for his daughter, but this idea was twisted by the Atlas to extremism. So we see this divination card, A Father's Love, which says, everything is not enough. Not enough. This world isn't good enough for him. I want to make a better one. Pursuing perfection, nothing else matters. The Shaper eventually fell into extremism, wanting to create a perfect world. He became completely extreme. Plus, he was constantly having his memories devoured by the Elder, so it's very possible that what Zana is doing is using childhood memories to anchor her father's human image. She might be doing exactly this. So why did these childhood memories become terrifying incarnations? Obviously, during this process, Zana was still affected by the Atlas. So using the moments when Zana had the deepest impressions of her father, some abhorrent incarnations still emerged. What about subsequent developments? First, was the Atlas destroyed? Did Zana succeed? We can compare POE1 and POE2 here. In POE1's Atlas guidance, both Zana and Kirak mention the Atlas, but in POE2, if you look carefully at the dialogue, Doriani never mentions the Atlas. And in POE1, we use the map device, and those things are called maps. But in POE2, that thing is called a translocation device, and we use waystones. The Atlas and maps were never mentioned in POE2. But does this mean the Atlas was successfully destroyed in POE2? Not necessarily, because both POE1 and POE2 have Atlas passives. They both have Atlas passives. Moreover, POE2's current storyline is actually a truncated version, because it only goes to Act 3 with Doriani. The complete chapter should theoretically be 6 acts, it's not even finished yet. So does POE2 not have an Atlas? At least for now, we can't be certain. Next, is the originator really Zana? You might think this question is strange, like, hey, in the dialogue, doesn't it directly say Zana is the originator, right? It directly says so. But in the recently announced developer diary, the last paragraph says, who is the originator? Is it Zana? Well, we'll talk about that next time. So here they're actually hinting that the originator might not be Zana. It's also possible that the originator here is who Eagon thinks is the originator, not the real originator the storyline wants to express. If the developer diary's hint is like this, then we'll have to wait and see. Third, the Maven and the Envoy. Why mention the Maven and the Envoy? Looking at storyline, if you let your imagination run wild, Zana and the Shaper are doing all this. If you let your imagination run wild, you'll think of several texts. These two texts. Henikora says the envoy from the stars. He was once a person, he was also once a father. Then when the envoy talks about the Maven, he says, we are kin. With this kin in the text, you need to see whether they wrote it as a strict definition or a broad definition. Because if it's a strict definition, it can refer to blood relatives. But if it's a broad definition, it can extend to just a group or tribe. But this doesn't prevent us from making some associations with these two texts. Since timelines and memory silk can now be interwoven and confused, is it possible that the Maven and the Envoy combination are actually Zana and Valdo? Let me say first that this deduction has no basis and I have no confidence in it. It's purely if you let your imagination run wild when seeing the script at this point. You can't help but start suspecting this. This would also explain why we never know what the cosmic horror above the Maven is. We know the Elder has decay above it, the Searing Exarch has cleansing fire above it, the Eater of Worlds has entanglement above it, but we never know what cosmic horror is above the Maven. We never know. So if the Maven and the Envoy really equal Zana and Valdo, then having nothing above them would really make sense. That's our discussion and chat about the Atlas of Mysteries. You ask if I have complete confidence in all these deductions? Actually no, so if we find out later that it's wrong, then it's wrong. Let's just treat it as discussion.